trying to do it. But my guest is here, the man himself, Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter, can't get it out. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning, Scott?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you are with me. I want to start in Ukraine. Well, before we start in Ukraine, it is Auschwitz commemoration ceremonies that have been taking place over the last week. And give me your take on this idea that, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's like 90% of every German that was killed on the Eastern Front. Give me your take on this revisionist history where these guys are acting as if Russia wasn't a part of this or the Soviet Union wasn't a part of this. I mean, there were some articles that, I think it was Schultz that said something like, I want to thank America for liberating something. Basically, because they're now at odds with Russia, they're now ignoring this kind of great effort that was taken by the Red Army in liberating Germany, for one, but also changing the map of Europe from being Germany dominated to what it is now. Give me your thoughts on this. I don't want to stay too long on this one, but I definitely want to hit that before the start because I find it to be atrocious.
Well, first of all, let's understand. I don't think the number is 90% of German casualties. I think it's between 60 and 70%, but it's still the vast majority of German casualties. We know that Russia destroyed, 7 out of 10 German divisions. At the end of the war, the United States, of course, caught up. We had the big cauldrons in the Ruhr Valley where we surrounded a lot of Germans and stacked the statistics in our favor. But prior to that, it was even more one-sided for the Soviet army and the pain that they were inflicting on Nazi Germany. If it weren't for the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany would not have been defeated in the time frame that took place. I mean, it's hard to say what would happen had America fully mobilized its resources and in the war dragged on. I think the United States would have been able to overcome Nazi, but the war could have changed. The Germans were building missiles and bombers capable of hitting American shores. They were working on a nuclear weapons program that would have leveled the playing field there. The war ended because of the Soviet Union on the time frame that it did because of the Soviet Union, because of the enormous sacrifice that the Soviet people played. 27 million dead. And so what's happening now, though, is because we are politically arrayed against Russia. Part of the Russophobia that exists in the West, in the United States, is to play down the significance of the Russian contribution, because, of course, anything that glorifies Soviet military prowess would be seen as glorifying Russian military prowess, and we don't want to do that. One of the greatest shames that's going to take place is on the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany, which is going to take place in May 9th. The Russians will have a victory day. This is a big one. This is going to be a very big deal. It used to be that the Allies would send troops to march in that parade because the Russians have always said it was an Allied victory. Yes, they celebrate the role and the sacrifice of the Red Army, but they've always acknowledged that this was an Allied victory. And the Russians, there's no more pride for the Russians than having the Allies march alongside of the Russians in celebration of this victory. But we continue to call May 9th a propaganda exercise. We say that it's just about the militarization of Russian society. This is, Putin, flexing muscles. And so we ignore May 9th. We ignore Victory Day, and we ignore the role that Russia played in defeating Nazi Germany. With all due respect to Schultz, don't thank the Americans and don't thank the Brits. Thank the Russians for freeing you from Nazi Germany, because had the Russians been defeated, or had the Russians not been as dominant as they were, the map of Germany would be completely different. And I just want to remind the Germans that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had a Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, who had a plan to divide Germany up, to eradicate Germany, to turn it to deindustrialize Germany, to turn it into an agronomy only state that would have killed millions of Germans and eradicated Germany as a modern nation state.
Yep.
If the Russians had been beaten and the United States was forced to dig deeper, to bring more men out, to mobilize, and the pain was even, was felt even greater by America, let's say pain somewhat equivalent to what the Soviets felt, our victory would have been totally different. We would have carved Germany up. We would have crushed Germany. We would have ground them into the dust of history. We would have made what the Romans did to Carthage pale by comparison. So Schultz, don't be thinking America so fast, because we are the ones that had the plan to erase you from the face of the earth. It was only because of the dominance of the Russian victory that we said, well, wait a minute, we might need Germany to be around to help us industrialize, to offset this manufactured threat we had from the Russians. But the Germans have to be very careful what they're doing here, and so does the rest of Europe. They owe the Soviet Union a huge debt of gratitude. They owe 27 million Soviet citizens a huge debt of gratitude. And instead of trying to rewrite history and erase the Russians away, I mean, what they're saying now, the liberation of Auschwitz, just to show you how ignorant these people are. They say they were liberated by Ukrainians. Well, I mean, yes, there may have been a Ukrainian officer here, a Ukrainian officer there, but wasn't it the first Ukrainian front that did it? That's a Ukraine. You guys do know that the Soviet fronts were geographically designated, not by, who was in control of Ukrainian troops. It was that the first Ukrainian front was fighting against the Nazis in Ukraine and advancing, and then they entered into Poland. But it wasn't a Ukrainian army led by Ukrainian officers. It was a Soviet army, primarily Russian army, led by Russian officers, just named the Ukrainian front. But these revisionists, it just shows the depth of ignorance that they have. But this is a travesty, and I have to tell you, having been to Russia, this hurts. I mean, this is something they take personally. They can take most affronts, they can take the insults, they can take, the stupidity. But when we come in and we besmirch the honor of the Red Army and the victory that was achieved by the Red Army over Nazi Germany, the Russians take that personal. And again, I keep saying, I'll leave it on this, the best move Donald Trump could make right now in resolving U.S.-Russian conflict, the best move would be to say, hey, Vladimir Putin, I would like to send a delegation to Moscow on May 9th. I won't be in it, but I'll send a high-level delegation, and I'd like American troops to march in the parade and send a contingent of 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne Division, the Big Red One, some of the divisions that fought so well during World War II. Send the units that met with the Soviets at Torgau on the Elbe River, and have them march, and have some of them march in World War II uniforms. And if you want to repair relations between the United States and Russia, you instantly repaired relations between the United States and Russia. The Russians will look upon that, and while they won't forget everything we did to them, they'll forgive just about anything if we show that kind of gratitude and show that kind of awareness. Right now we don't, and the Russians are perturbed by it and even angered by it. Donald Trump could solve almost every problem we have with the Russians just by that simple act.
Look, I agree with you. The lift that it took in order to beat the Nazis in that war, that's not something we should forget as a world, especially since all of us were able to come together in order to do that as a country, as a world. No, man, I agree with you 1,000%. Speaking of that, speaking of this notion of trying to mend fences and everything else, a report came out, I believe this was a couple of days ago, in The Economist, and it pointed out that forces of Ukraine, it says, are, quote, consistently understaffed, under pressure, and cracking. It says, quote, we no longer have tactics beyond plugging holes. We throw battalions into the chaotic mess and hope we can somehow stop the grind. This was a Ukrainian commander who went by Kupol, told The Economist. Why hasn't Trump contacted Putin? Like, meaning he could pick up the phone call. I mean, he could pick up the phone and call Putin now. Initially, Trump said he wasn't going to do it because he wasn't president yet, and he didn't want to Bigfoot Joe Biden. Okay, fair enough. He is now president. Why no phone call?
Well, I mean, now you're asking me get into the mind of Donald Trump, and
Yes, I
an
mean,
army of psychologists have been trying to do that for years. And I am not going to, to pretend that I have the ability to do that. I will look at it from an analytical standpoint. I think Donald Trump knows that this phone call between him and Putin, the first phone call, will be an extremely important phone call, and one that will set the tone and the pace for future relations. Again, I come back to the best phone call Donald Trump could make would be to call up Vladimir Putin just to say hi and say, look, we got a lot of issues we need to talk about right now. And I got my team working on it, got your team working on it. We're going to have another phone call, Mr. President. But I just wanted to reach out and say, we are seriously on the path of restoring normalized relations with you. And I know you're getting ready for the big May Day parade. I want to send JD Vance and a delegation to Moscow there, not for treaty signing, not for anything, just to attend the May Day celebrations. And I'd like to send an American contingent. Here's my guy. Can you give me a designation? We can have my guy talk to your guy, and we can make this happen. Just get the ball rolling on that, because this is a big deal. 80th year. I think it would be a good symbol of American-Russian, the restoration of American-Russian friendship. Then you and I can work out the details later. This is a complicated problem, and we're not going to solve it today. But I'd like to get that going. Then hang up the phone. Victory, victory, victory. You know how Donald Trump keeps talking about winning? He just won. Because now Putin's going to hang up the phone. He's going to turn to the guy and go, make that happen. Then he's going to turn to his people and say, all right, this next phone call, let's build on this. Let's build on this gesture here. And that gives Trump to come up with a policy that's going to work. One of the reasons why Trump doesn't make that phone call right now is that, he was hoping that he had a plan that would resonate in Russia. I mean, he was told the Russians are losing. He was told the Russians are taking casualties. He was told this whole thing. And it's now becoming apparent to him that none of that was true. The Russians aren't losing. They're winning. The casualties aren't anywhere what Keith Kellogg says they are. It's a far worse situation for the Ukrainians. And here's the other thing. The Ukrainians are collapsing right now. A negotiation is going to take months, 4 to 6 months to work this thing out. And Trump is a businessman. You don't enter a negotiation until you have all your ducks in order. But if I'm coming in and my strongest position is on day one, and I'm trying to come in and make some demands, and we say, okay, we'll meet tomorrow. I come in tomorrow, but the Russians have advanced and taken 2 more cities, and the Ukrainians and they're collapsing, and their economy is. And I'm trying to make demands. The other side's going to go, well, wait a minute. We got to reassess here. We're not going to give up this, that, and the other thing because we already own it. Why give up something that we own already? And oh, by the way, we're not so keen on the rushed pace here. In fact, if we wait another week, we're going to own almost everything else. I think Trump understands he has no negotiating hand right now. One of the things that he appears to be doing is hastening the collapse of Ukraine. Politically, it's very difficult for Donald Trump to dictate to Ukraine that you must surrender. So they make the pretense that, Zelensky's large and in charge, that the Ukrainians are going to be at the table, that they have a vote, nothing happens in Ukraine without Ukraine, da, 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 da. But they just shut off foreign aid. Now, it's not military aid, but it's foreign aid. Right. Ukraine's collapsing. The Ukrainian government right now is panic calling the European Union saying, we need lots of money right now, or we can't pay salaries. We can't do anything. Our whole society collapses. All of the Ukrainian propaganda machine, all the independent media and everything, they were funded 100% by the United States, and they're all going bankrupt. They're all unemployed right now. I'm crying for them. But the point is that's Ukrainian society collapsing. So the other thing Trump knows is it would be better for him to call Putin when Ukraine has called up the United States and say, do whatever you have to do to make this war stop, but it's over. We're dying right now. We're not making any demands. Just make it end, make it end, make it end. And then he can call Putin and say, yeah, they're ready to make it end. Let's bring this thing to a close. Boom. But I think Trump understands that the more he waits, the stronger the position he has becomes, because the reality of Ukraine's defeat and the reality of the Russian victory becomes so apparent to everybody that it softens the political blow that he's going to face when Russia wins this war. This is not going to be an easy thing for Trump to sell to Congress, to the American people, to the world. he has to be careful not being seen as a compliant tool of Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And one way you do that is to make sure that the reality of the Russian victory, the inevitability of the Russian victory, is so absolute that you can't be blamed for it. And then what he'll do is he'll say it's Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden is the one who started this war. Joe Biden's the one that got it. My job is just to get us out of this thing, which is he's trying to do. But he was trying to do it in a clever way where he would impose his will on Russia. Russia's going to impose its will on the world when it comes to Ukraine. And it's up to Donald Trump to mitigate the political consequences of that. And again, I just keep saying, why not let the Russians help you? You know that scene from Jerry Maguire, help me, help you. This is really what, Putin should be telling Trump, help me, help you. Okay. I'm going to get everything out. Show me the money. We're going to show you the money, baby. We've won this war. But now we're going to wrap it up in a way that looks good for everybody. And again, the way you do that is to engender goodwill. And the way you engender goodwill is to have American troops marching in the May 9th parade and have a high-level delegation, J.D. Vance, a former Marine, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, in attendance there, celebrating not Russian victory over Ukraine, but an Allied victory over Nazi Germany.
1,000% agree with you. I agree with everything that you just said, and you're right. When you think about it in those terms, there is Joe Biden has spent the last 3 years whipping up Europe, whipping up Ukraine, and whipping up, let's say, the U.S. political instrument to be in regard in this war. We're with you for as long as it takes, et cetera, et cetera. It'd be weird to kind of stop on a dime. And it does seem like he's kind of letting them linger and languish. I would imagine Trump is getting the same stories like the one that was out The Economist. We no longer have the tactics beyond plugging holes. We throw battalions into the chaotic mess and we hope that they can somehow stop the grind. And this is after Budanov came out, effectively said by the summer, Ukraine may not exist.
Well, remember, Budanov's the guy that was saying that we're going to win. We're winning. We're beating the Russians. It's all propaganda, Russian propaganda. And here's the thing. Under Joe Biden, the Department of Defense and the CIA weren't allowed to dig deep into Ukrainian lies because they recognized that what's going on here is a propaganda war. That what needed to happen is that the American people and the population of Europe had to believe in the inevitability of an Allied victory over Russia. In order to do that, you couldn't tell the truth about what's going on in the battlefield. That's why my trips to Russia, my conversations with Russians were seen as one of the greatest threats to the United States of America, because the truth, you can't have that truth told. And so they were told not to dig deep. So the numbers that were being briefed to Biden and American decision makers were the numbers fed to us by the Ukrainians. And we were told to accept that our narrative had to align with the Ukrainian narrative. That had to be the case. And even when we deviated from it, we did so only using intelligence sources, propaganda sources that maximized the bad news for Russia and minimized the bad news for Ukraine. We weren't allowed to go public with this stuff. It wasn't allowed to be part of our official policy making. Trump is still getting the residual. I mean, Keith Kellogg is a byproduct of that. His number one advisor is a man who only receives misinformation, disinformation from pro-Ukrainian sources. And so Trump has been fed that. Tulsi Gabbard is about to go through a confirmation process. And it looks like there are the votes to do that.
Yeah.
And this is why the establishment fears her, because she's going to come in and the first thing she's going to say is, knock off this propaganda BS. I need the hard facts. And suddenly it's not going to be reporters from The Economist that are saying, positions that used to be held by 30 men are now being held by 6 men. There's no rotation and those men are doomed to die. Their only chance is to surrender or else they die. No one's coming for them. And that's happening along the entire front. She'll come to the president and she'll say, Mr. President, the situation is far worse than you could possibly imagine. You've been lied to this entire time. This is the truth of what's happening on the battlefield. These are the communications intercepts of Russian commanders that we've not been allowed to process because of previous orders. But as you see, the Russians are in total control of the battlefield. Here's the intercepts of the Ukrainians that we weren't allowed to collect because they were our allies and we weren't supposed to collect against them. But look at the panic, look at the disarray. The Ukrainians have been feeding us nonsense. This is the truth. Mr. President, if this war goes on, every day that goes on, the scope and scale of the Russian victory is going to be magnified even greater. We need to bring the war to an end now, even if it's cast as a Russian victory, because next week the Russian victory will be even greater, and the week after that even greater. We need to mitigate against the size of the Russian victory, and whatever leverage we might retain on the negotiating table, we only have it if the Ukrainians are seen as capable of putting up some resistance. If we wait much longer, they will collapse and the Russians won't need us at the negotiating table. That would be a hell of a briefing. And it's a briefing that only Tulsi Gabbard can provide Donald Trump, because the U.S. intelligence community is incapable of providing that kind of briefing today because of the politicized nature of collection regarding Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. So hopefully once the president starts getting the good stuff, he'll have, I think he should either push Keith Kellogg to the side and minimize his participation or fire him. Just straight up saying, Keith Kellogg lied to me, misled me, he's fired. And we were appointing somebody new to be the envoy. I don't know, Scott Ritter. I'm joking. But the point is, get somebody who knows Russia, knows the issue, understands the problems, and is strongly pro-American, an American patriot that's looking out for what's best for the United States.
Right.
But this isn't a zero-sum game. What's best for the United States doesn't have to be bad for Russia. In this situation, what's best for the United States is more than likely what's best for Russia. That there's a confluence of strategic direction here and such. But we have to be honest with ourselves. And right now, there's no honesty in Washington, D.C. about Russia, about Ukraine, and about this conflict.
Yeah. No, fair point. What does it look like? What does a collapse look like? You pointed out that the longer this goes, the worse it gets. And if you have the situation where Ukraine collapses, the way that they're talking about the battlefield, hell, if you go what Bodanov is saying, he is effectively saying we could cease to exist as a country. If the military does collapse, let's say Russia hits the last defensive line, or let's say the desertions get to the point where they lose military effectiveness, what happens materially on the ground? I guess I don't have a good framing of my mind of what that looks like. Is it they force elections? Is it they occupy, the territory? Like, what does that look like materially on the ground if the Ukrainian military just fundamentally collapses on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, remember we're talking about an awful lot of troops here. We know what collapse looks like. We've historically we've seen collapse. Look at what happened to the Germans on the Eastern Front in the summer of 1944. What the Russians call Operation Bagration, what the Germans in the West have called the collapse of Army Group Center. Collapse is just that, the inability to maintain a cohesive front. Where where you are, even if you're in retreat, you have control over the situation. You're able to counterattack here, punch back, and collapse is where there is no cohesion, where units stop, linking into their left and their right, and the men stop functioning as a unit and start functioning as individuals and running for their lives, where all command and control has been eliminated. Whatever resistance is taking place is the resistance of desperate men. Fighting as individuals or as clusters, but not as part of a coordinated effort. That's what collapse looks like. We saw it on the Western Front. The Germans, near the end of the war, collapsed against the United States and the British, and we were making huge advances. I want to remind people, though, that collapse doesn't mean the end of resistance. In fact, a military in collapse oftentimes is more lethal in the short term than a military that has, cohesion. One of the reasons is that if I have cohesion, I'll retreat from a position. I'll say, oh my gosh, I can't hold this position much longer. So, hey boss, I need to pull back. He coordinates with the other units. They fall back, provide cover. I fall back into a new defensive position, and we delay the enemy's response. There's cohesion there. I lost some territory, but I maintain my force structure. A unit that it's in collapse, there's no coordination. They're running, then they get trapped, and the trapped animal fights the hardest.
Yeah.
The bloodiest month for Americans in World War II, the bloodiest month of all the fighting we did, of the fighting in Kasserine Pass, the fighting in Anzio, Salerno, D-Day, big battle. That wasn't the bloodiest month. June wasn't the bloodiest month for Americans. December 44, the Battle of the Bulge, huge defeat for us. Attacked big fights and all that stuff. That wasn't the bloodiest month for us. The bloodiest month for Americans was April 1945, the final full month of the war, when the Germans were in collapse, literal collapse, cohesion done, units withdrawing. Because every time we caught a German force, it became the Alamo. And they just turned around, they dug in, and they fought to the death. We lost more Americans in April 1945 against a defeated German army than we did in any other month of the war. That's what collapse looks like. Collapse is violent. Collapse is catastrophic. Collapse is apocalyptic. You're seeing death and destruction on a scope and scale that's unimaginable. Collapses entire units being run down, gunned down, mowed down. Collapses fields of dead bodies. That's what collapse looks like, and that's what's going to happen to the Ukrainians because they have no more combat cohesion. Again, positions that used to be held by 30 men that would have rotations every 5 to 7 days. That means 30 men go into the front line, they dig in, they fight hard, and then in 5 or 6 days they're rotated out and a fresh unit's put in. What's happening right now is 6 men are sent in and abandoned.
Wow.
And you can't win a war this way. And that's where the Ukrainians are at. Those 6 men, they're going to have the Alamo. They're going to sit there and they're going to defend. They're going to make the Russians come in, surround it, assault it, blow it up, kill it, burn them out. If they're survivors, they'll surrender. If the Russians are in a mood, they'll take them prisoner. If not, they'll kill them. But that's the reality right now. The Ukrainians are not achieving any tactical victories on the battlefield. Everything that happens ends up in a Ukrainian tactical, operational, and strategic defeat. That's it. They're killing Russians, but not as many as people would like to think. These artificial numbers that Keith Kellogg has been whispering into Trump's ears are as fake as the day is long. It has no bearing on reality. And when Trump is briefed on the reality is today, right now on the battlefield, the Ukrainians are suffering 20-to-1 loss ratio. For every Russian they get, 20 Ukrainians are going down. And they already have a manpower problem. So this is going to get even worse for the Ukrainians. That's what collapse looks like. And now we're pairing that with, because again, Clausewitz, war is an extension of politics by other means. You can't look at the battlefield in isolation. It's about the political reality, the economic reality of Ukraine. Ukraine is in economic collapse. Their economy only functions because of the money that's invested by outsiders. Yeah. Who pays all the salaries? Ukraine makes no money. There is no tax base. There is no earnings. There's corruption. But the salaries, the pensions, everything's paid by American money and European money. The American money just stopped coming in. And the Ukrainians are saying, well, we can't pay anybody now. We don't have any money. They're turning to the Europeans, begging for tens of billions of dollars to come right now. And Europe's already stretched out. They don't have any more money. So you're also looking at the societal, political, and economic collapse of Ukraine taking place simultaneously. And this is, again, if I were advising Joe Biden, I would say the leverage that you have isn't on the battlefield. Russia will win the military aspects of this conflict. But the more cohesion that exists in Ukraine prior to the surrender, the more likely it is we're going to have some influence on what post-conflict Ukraine looks like. That's where we have some leverage. But if you wait and hit the total collapse of Ukraine, see, right now, Putin's ready to accept. And if I were Trump, I'd do this. I'd say, when I come in, yeah, Mr. President, yep, yeah. Zelensky, no, he's gone. We actually just the CIA assassinated him this morning, or whatever we want to say. He died in a car accident, or he's on permanent vacation in Miami. Look, you can joke about it. That's what we did to South Vietnam.
Yeah.
President Diem got inconvenienced. CIA killed him. It's what we do. It's what we do. And so we'll do that to Zelensky. But you call it, say Zelensky's not the issue. We've spoken to the speaker of the Ukrainian parliament, who has stepped in as interim president, and the speaker of the parliament is ready to sit down and talk about the terms of conflict termination. And the Russians will be, we can deal with that person. But now, you know what I just did there? I made the Ukrainian parliament part of Ukraine's political future.
Right.
I now have retained some of Ukraine's past political, cohesion into its future. But if you wait for political collapse, there won't be a parliament. And Russia will dictate 100% what the political construct of a post-conflict Ukraine will be. Now, me personally, I think that's the best idea. But as an American advising the president, who's looking for some sort of, victory here,
yeah,
there it is, boss. I just gave you the best victory you're going to get. Empowering the Speaker of the Parliament. And right now, we need to pick the best speaker possible, the one that's going to, more closely adhere to what's ever left of American interests in Ukraine. Because, our military is going to be gone. The CIA is going to be gone. It's all going to be gone. We need to have some ability to influence Ukraine's political situation going forward. That's in America's interests. And you do that by creating the conditions of conflict termination where we have a say in who's running the parliament, and that person becomes, at least in interim fashion, the leader of Ukraine. That's the best we're going to get out of this. I mean, people are going, well, is that enough? Guys, that's all we're going to get. But right now, if we continue going, we're not even going to get that. So, yeah, I think Zelensky's history, I think, and if Ukraine's not careful, because the United States cut off this funding for 80 some odd days, we're less than a week into the funding termination. Ukraine's already in free fall.
Yeah, they are.
What Ukraine's going to look like in 3 months. So, and I think that might be, again, giving Trump the benefit of the doubt here, where I think that actually might be part of his strategy, which is to break Ukraine so that the United States isn't the one compelling Ukraine to step down and restructure. The United States is actually stepping in, saying, we got to preserve what's left from your defeat, which is Biden's defeat. I don't know. It's like reading tea leaves when you try to get into Donald Trump. Have you ever seen that movie in John Malkovich's Brain or something like that?
Yeah. Well, very bizarre movie. Yeah.
I think getting into Donald Trump's brain would be very bizarre. Yeah. They should make a remake of it.
Yeah. Last question on this HTS. So Al Jilani apparently put out that in order for Russia, they want compensation. They want compensation from the Russians. And they're saying, well, this compensation doesn't necessarily have to be entirely financial. It could be with investments and everything else. Piggyback to that, it seems that, with the very least reports on the ground, that there's not much activity going on at the bases in Syria that were effectively run by the Russians. And piggyback onto that, sanctions are still in place from the standpoint of Europe and the United States against Syria, now with the notion of trying to get the Russians out of Syria. What's going on with this? Are the Russians going to remain in Syria? And what is this compensation that they're asking for?
Well, I mean, again, we're talking about Russian prerogatives. The Russians didn't get into Syria to occupy Syria.
Right. They were invited.
They went into Syria to save the regime of Bashar al-Assad. If Russia were to stay in Syria, it would be because Russia felt that it could turn its presence into a force of stability, to engender stability in Syria. Russia won't do that with a gun to its head. It's just not how Russia operates. So HTS has to be very careful here. And I think right now, there's some thought that they might even be trying to hold the Russian military, the residual Russian military presence in Syria hostage to demand, saying, we're not going to let you evacuate, or we're going to, you're not in control anymore. You remember that again, I always use movies, but that Tom Hanks movie where he was the ship captain and the Somali pirates came in, I am in command now. I mean, I think they're trying to play that role, but I remind HTS what happened to that man at the end of the movie. He wasn't in command, and all of his people were dead, and he was in prison. Don't mess with the Russians. It's just sound advice here. But I think my approach would be to approach the Russians and say, we need you to help us stabilize the region. You're a force of stability. You have the ability to interface with segments of the Syrian population that are hostile to us or are very leery of us. They trust you. And, there's some reconstruction that needs to be done, a lot of it because of the bombs you dropped on us. And we'd like you to take the lead in doing that. And if that's the case, then we welcome Russia's continued presence in Syria. We'd like to talk to you about force structure. We don't think you need the offensive strike power that you used to have because we're not at war with each other anymore. But we would like, your military police battalions, bring in those Chechens that you brought in before, the Muslims, they get along well with the people here. There's a strategy to be done here, but I think trying to strong arm Russia is the wrong approach. It will ultimately backfire.
Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, thank you, my man. Where can people find you, Scott?
ScottRitter.com is the easiest place to go, a one-stop shop. All my links to the things I'm doing are located there. My Substack, you can get to my Telegram page and ScottRitter.com. And I'll just say this, I won't get too much specific, but there's some new and exciting projects coming out that'll be done on Telegram and done on X. And so if you guys are following me on Telegram or following my X, there'll be some interesting product coming down.
Can you preempt any of it? Give us a leak. Give us a leak.
Well, I mean, my X is at Real Scott Ritter. Follow me there, and then you'll see. And I'm also Scott Ritter on Telegram, and follow me there. And when the product is ready, you'll become aware of it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thanks, Scott, man. I appreciate this. You have a good one. Be safe.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.